Hello everybody, Anthony Aniano here from RotoBaller and RotoBaller.com with the sleeper and value plays for the division round of the NFL playoffs. Guys, don't forget, like and subscribe right here to RotoBaller's YouTube channel to keep getting all sorts of great content courtesy of the RotoBaller.com staff, as well as head over to RotoBaller.com, sign up now using the promo code ACES and get a part of any of the premium package we have there for you. All right? 4 games on the slate, 2 on Saturday, 2 on Sunday. So time to take a look at some sleepers and value plays for the divisional rounds of the NFL playoffs. And we start at the quarterback position, and he's the least expensive quarterback on the slate this week, and that's Brock Purdy of the San Francisco 49ers. $5,400 on DraftKings. On the season, 14.8 points per game. However, over his last 7 games, he's had at least 15 fantasy points. He's got 7 straight games now of 2 straight touchdowns since taking over for the 49ers. Each game, a minimum of 2 touchdown passes, 3 touchdown passes. Each of the last 2 had a rushing touchdown as well last week. In those 7 games, the totals are amazing. 16 touchdown passes to only 4 interceptions. At 5,400, he's a little bit less than Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones, a tougher matchup, in my opinion, against the Philadelphia Eagles. Brock Purdy goes against the Dallas defense that only allows just under 230 passing yards per game and only 19.4 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks during the regular season. However, of the 8 teams remaining in this season's playoffs, Dallas has allowed the 3rd most passing touchdowns, 23. Only teams that have allowed more passing touchdowns are the Kansas City Chiefs and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Both of their quarterbacks obviously over that 6,000 threshold that I try to keep my players under here for some value and sleeper play. So Brock Purdy at 5,400, a nice play to get some higher priced position players into your lineup. At the running back position, 2 running backs to be mindful of. First is James Cook of the Buffalo Bills. Now be mindful, Cook is at this point kind of splitting 50-50 with Devin Singletary. In fact, last week, Devin Singletary had 10 carries. James Cook had 12. Neither player had a reception. Now, Cook is $4,800 on DraftKings. Terrific price if you want to pair with a high-priced running back like a Christian McCaffrey. He's got 10 or more fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games with 2 touchdowns during that span. Again, in that 50-50 timeshare at this point with Singletary. The Bengals have allowed only 106.6 to be exact, rushing yards per game, but they do allow 20.3 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs with 9 rushing and 12 total touchdowns to the running back position. My second sleeper and value play at the running back position, Miles Sanders, 5,700. A little surprised he was under 6,000 this week. Averaged 13.4 fantasy points per game on the season. Now, the last couple of weeks, he hasn't done much from a fantasy perspective. In fact, week 18 against the Giants, only 11 carries for 33 yards. However, week 14 against the Giants, Miles Sanders went off. 17 carries, 144 yards, 2 touchdowns, 31.5 DraftKings fantasy points in that week 14 matchup. He's averaged just under 75 rushing yards per game, 74.6 to be exact on the season, and has 11 touchdowns. And he goes against that Giant defense that on the season allowed 144.2 rushing yards per game, most out of all the teams left in this season's playoffs. 22.3 fantasy points per game allowed to the running backs by the Giants with 15 total touchdowns. Again, under 6,000, I kind of slide him into a value type of situation, and that's where Miles Sanders sits at this moment. At the wide receiver position, Michael Gallup, $3,800 on DraftKings. He's my least expensive player on the list today. Last week, 6 targets, 5 receptions, 46 yards, and a touchdown against Tampa. That's 15.6 fantasy points. San Francisco, for all the hype about their defense, and I get it, trust me, I'm all in. Can't run the ball on them, only about 78 rushing yards a game, but you can throw the ball against San Francisco 49ers, and wide receivers especially have been successful against the 49ers secondary. San Francisco's 28th in the league in allowing fantasy points to opposing wide receivers with 36.6 fantasy points per game allowed. They've allowed 16 touchdowns on the season to the wide receiver position. Attention will be paid to CeeDee Lamb. Dalton Schultz is coming off of 2 touchdowns. Michael Gallup in a spot to give you a sneaky 12 to 15 points like he did last week. My second wide receiver, and he continues to be undervalued, and I'll keep bringing him up until they raise the price on him, but that's Isaiah Hodgins of the New York Giants. The New York Giants' number 1 wide receiver. He's still only $4,900 on DraftKings. I went with him last week. He was $4,100, I believe, and he paid off. They've raised his price, but not enough to keep him off the sleeper and value play list. 14 or more fantasy points in 5 of his last 6 games. Last week, 8 for 105 and a touchdown on 9 targets. Now, no doubt about it, the Philly secondary is tough, only allowing the 6th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers at 29.8 points per game. However, they did allow 21 passing touchdowns this year, and 16 of those touchdowns did go to the wide receiver position. He's worth a flyer, is Isaiah Hodgins, at that price point of $4,900. And finally, to wrap up the sleeper and value plays for your divisional round, tight end Dallas Goedert of the Philadelphia Eagles. People are going to pay up for Travis Kelce. They'll pay up for George Kittle, no doubt about it. And that leads me to Dallas Goedert at $4,500. Terrific price for the 3rd best tight end on the slate this weekend. $4,500, like I mentioned, averaging 12.1 fantasy points per game. Since returning from injury, over the last 3 games, Dallas Goedert has 16 total targets, so basically 5.3 targets per game. And the New York Giants have done a terrible job this year defending opposing tight ends. In fact, they are 25th in the league against opposing tight ends, allowing 13.1 points per game to the position and allowing 6 touchdowns to tight ends. The 2nd most touchdowns allowed to tight ends out of the 8 teams remaining in this season's playoffs. So to summarize, the sleeper and value plays for the division round of the NFL playoffs: quarterback Brock Purdy, running backs James Cook and Miles Sanders, wide receivers Michael Gallup and Isaiah Hodgins, and the tight end is Dallas Goedert. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you next time right here on RotoBaller Radio.